kind of shipping lines.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So let's just say those boats that are stuck outside of LA and Long Beach do decide to head up to Oakland. What kind of additional resources or money would you need to expand your operations to take some of the load off?
You know, Oakland is a much smaller port than LA and Long Beach. Certainly, we can't say move all the extra capacity up to Oakland and we're going to handle it. What we're saying is, however, what's happening is that the cargo that's usually destined for Northern California, Nevada, Utah, and also the cargo that exports, for example, the agricultural products in California, the Central Valley, that are much closer to Oakland than to LA and Long Beach. Well, we're saying that those cargoes should continue to come to Oakland directly from Asia without having to stop in LA and Long Beach first, and having a special direct service rather than this sort of stopping off at the two ports. So I think one of the sort of victims of this blockage is our exporters, and especially our agricultural product exporters. What they're having to do is not only having to go down to LA and Long Beach to go ship their products, but they're also having to worry about spoilage of some of the products that are time sensitive, and simply some of the smaller exporters are just not able to basically continue in this kind of mode of operation.
Black Friday, Danny, is just a couple of weeks away. I mean, if the situation at our ports does not improve, I mean, what could the holidays look like?
Well, I think it's really, the current disruption is not going to resolve itself by Christmas, and that's unfortunate. I think that some of the supply chain problems is already going to be impacting the holidays. What we think is important is to solve for beyond that, to make sure that this does not continue for much longer. And I think even longer term, we need to figure out how our supply chain can be resilient for future disruptions or irregular behaviors in consumer spending, or even this kind of changed new normal that we need to handle. And we all need to make sure that the ports are an economic driver when we grow, but not choke points. And I think that's what's unfortunate, is as our economy grows, our consumer spending grows, the ports have become a choke point in the system, which otherwise would make good news that we spend more and that we have more economic activity. So I think the important thing here is to make sure that this crisis does not continue for much longer, and in the long term that the ports are actually facilitating growth in the market.
Danny Wan is the Executive Director of the Port of Oakland and President of the California Association of Port Authorities. Danny, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Zoe Bedell still remembers visceral details of her time as a Marine lieutenant in Afghanistan's Helmand province.
Every once in a while you get sort of a smell of earth, and that always kind of reminds me of being back in Helmand. The other thing that reminds me is kind of the smell of diesel fuel, because when you walk off the plane, when you land, that you're on a runway, it was dark, you were disoriented, you were exhausted from a miserable trip, and you just sort of get hit by this smell of kind of stale diesel fuel is how I would describe it.
Bedell served in the Marine Corps from 2007 to 2011, deploying twice to Afghanistan. She was part of what were called female engagement teams, Marines who went on patrol with the infantry in Afghan villages. Her job as part of these teams was to go door to door and win the trust of Afghan families.
It's just learning about the concerns that people had, which they might be more open to sharing with someone they didn't think was there to kill them.
We called her to talk about the first Veterans Day in 20 years in which the United States is not at war in Afghanistan. I asked her what it's been like to see the U.S. withdraw and the Taliban take over.
We spent a lot of time bolstering the Afghan government, but at some place as remote as Helmand, it was very clear that the presence was weak at best, that they weren't really able to govern the area, and so, it's not surprising that as soon as the U.S. presence withdrew, that something else came to fill that vacuum.
So, we're talking around Veterans Day, and this is a time when we are supposed to collectively honor the service and sacrifice of people who have served, like yourself. How does this day sit with you? I mean, does the holiday itself satisfy something for you?
I've always found the holiday a little bit odd, same with Memorial Day in many ways, in that people will thank you for your service, which is appreciated but always a little bit awkward, and you never know how you're supposed to respond to that. And I had a lot of challenges, but ultimately my service experience was positive. And I say that even having sued the Department of Defense afterwards.
We should say you sued over women's role in the military, broadly speaking.
Exactly. I had a lot of frustration with the sexism that I experienced when I was in the Marine Corps, and even with that, I still overall described it as a positive experience. And the reality is that's not the case for everyone. And so I almost think of Veterans Day as being more for those people, more for the people who really sacrificed, whose lives were very fundamentally changed, not always for the better in their service.
We remember back to those early years of the war, not just the early years, but how veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq were welcomed into restaurants with standing ovations or on airplanes. Did that ever happen to you?
I served from 2007 to 2011, so I wasn't the first one in, I wasn't the last one out. I was kind of right there in the middle during the Afghan surge. People were still very supportive of veterans. Maybe some of the novelty had worn off, maybe not a standing ovation, but discounts and general appreciation, even in places where the support for the wars was not there. So I think that is probably a helpful or a positive difference between this war and some of maybe our past wars, particularly Vietnam, where the unpopularity of the war really was transferred to the veterans. And I think also helpfully we've moved past some of the performative aspects to more meaningful support for veterans. I personally benefited from the GI Bill when I went to law school, and more meaningful support for the challenges that people have when they come back.
You mentioned this, the Vietnam War, and how the veterans of that war were not welcomed home. I mean, it's an understatement. And the mental anguish of that generation of veterans wasn't really acknowledged. I mean, they called it shell shock then. We do now understand it as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Can you explain, though, how even that understanding, that label, how that has evolved over the last 20 years?
I think it's probably fairly easy to imagine that if someone hit an improvised explosive device, if they saw their friend die, if they saw someone be shot, if they themselves were shot, it's fairly easy for people to understand that that can cause trauma. But even just sort of repeated deployments to an incredibly stressful place where those things are happening around you can cause that kind of trauma. And then another group that I think people have a broader or better understanding now is the experience of women. That was something where people didn't necessarily understand that women were in combat and that they would also therefore be just as likely or just as prone to suffer the stress of that combat experience, but also the military sexual trauma that is an unfortunately large and prevalent part of women's service experience. I think it's a broader understanding of what can contribute to PTSD and how that plays out when people return to civilian life.
What do you do on Veterans Day? Or maybe do's not the right word. Where does your mind go? Is there someone you remember?
So I do think back about on my first deployment, my unit lost a Marine, Sergeant Cesar Ruiz, and he had a wife, and he had left the Marine Corps originally actually because he had a small child. And I think about their family. When someone was killed in action, they would do honor flights, and the people on the bases where the coffins would fly out from would line up and send off the Marine or the soldier, as the case may be. And you know, we would know their name, but we wouldn't know anything else about them. But that moment of being solemn, being present, and lending our support, I sort of try to recreate that in my mind, if that makes sense. And it's very abstract, it's very vague, and it never really feels sufficient, to be honest.
The CEO of the world's largest movie theater chain, AMC, is selling over $50 million worth of shares in the company. AMC came close to bankruptcy during the pandemic, but it was able to survive in part thanks to the help of millions of ordinary retail investors who snapped up shares of the company's stock. Robin Farzad, a host of Public Radio's Full Disclosure, has been following AMC's roller coaster ride, and he's here to tell us more. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Jane. How are you?
Good. So the overwhelming majority of AMC shareholders are individual investors. So remind us of who they are and what role they've played in creating AMC's really good fortunes.
We are living in surreal days. I mean, a pandemic and boom in home streaming devastate the movie theater business. AMC is glide pathing to bankruptcy, but no, an army of little investors hanging on to nostalgia and chatting it up on online boards. They bid up the beleaguered stock, in effect creating a windfall currency for the chain. Management typically listens to big mutual and hedge funds, but not mom and pop. But these small accounts flexed their power and they want to exert their ownership. So now the company is worth $20 billion and is listening to the mom and pop investors.
So, all right, so these retail investors really drove up the company's stock price. How are they viewing now CEO Adam Aron's decision to cash in these millions of dollars in shares?
Well, at $40 right now, AMC stock is nearly at the midway point of its peak and trough visited during COVID. And the CEO is out there insisting, who loves you, investors? I love you. I really love you. But, you know, I'm also 67 years old and have tax and estate planning to attend to. So please don't read too much into it. Hey, let's go sell some more popcorn.
Okay, well, the CEO needs to keep all these ordinary investors.
The pandemic story changes every day, so we've got you covered with Larry Mannel's daily podcast, COVID in LA.
I wanted to know, is the virus going to go dormant?
At LAist.com, on the KPCC app, and wherever you get your podcasts.
We're all in this together.
It's Wednesday, November 10th. I'm Nick Roman with the afternoon edition of the LA Report from KPCC and LAist. Here are the stories we've been following today. Governor Gavin Newsom visited the VA hospital in West LA this morning to encourage more people to get vaccinated against COVID-19. He pointed to rising rates of transmission in the Inland Empire and warned of another winter surge in cases statewide. The governor also made the case for vaccine booster shots and again pushed back on rumors that his 2-week absence from public view followed a bad reaction to his booster shot.
Well, that's made up. Had absolutely no impact whatsoever from the COVID shot, nor the original, nor the booster. Absolutely none. No fatigue, even no soreness.
The governor got the one-and-done shot of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in April and followed that up last month with a half-dose booster shot of the Moderna vaccine. Soon after, he canceled plans to attend the UN Climate Summit in Scotland. He told reporters yesterday that he skipped the summit so he could spend Halloween with his 4 children, ages 5 to 12. Back to boosters for a moment. For many of us, it's been 2 shots of COVID-19 vaccine, then a booster 6 months later. Is that our future? Another shot of vaccine every 6 months or so? Dr. Kimberly Schreiner says maybe not. She's an infectious disease specialist at Pasadena's Huntington Hospital, and she says there's some early data that says the booster finally does the trick.
And it may well be, hopefully, that we are not going to have to be doing this on a real frequent basis. That the series of 3 shots, especially this one 6 months after the second shot, really ingrains the information into your immune system about SARS-CoV-2.
Dr. Kimberly Schreiner at Huntington Hospital in Pasadena. She's one of the COVID-19 experts you hear daily on KPCC's Air Talk. By the way, she highly recommends that you get a booster shot of COVID-19 vaccine. 3 weeks have passed since the shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the movie set in New Mexico. Victor Alec Baldwin fired what was supposed to be a prop gun loaded with blanks. Instead, it had live ammo. New Mexico authorities have not said much recently about their investigation, and KPCC's John Horn says several Hollywood guilds have also been quiet about guns on sets.
In the wake of Hutchins' death, a variety of individual actors and producers have said they no longer will use real firearms on sets. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, for one, told Variety's Elizabeth Wagmeister that his production company only will use fake weapons going forward.
In a movie and a television show, or anything we do or produce, we won't use real guns at all. We're going to switch over to rubber guns.
Yet several prominent show business guilds have remained mum on this issue. The Producers Guild of America has shared sympathies but has said nothing else publicly. SAG-AFTRA, which represents KPCC on-air staff and Baldwin, said only that it was devastated by the shooting. And the Directors Guild of America said it's awaiting details from a full investigation. One Hollywood organization, however, has been vocal. The American Society of Cinematographers said it wants the industry to make set safety a top priority. So far, the investigation has revealed that live ammunition was found on set and that the film's assistant director did not inspect Baldwin's gun carefully before Hutchins was shot. Meanwhile, a non-binding online petition to ban guns on sets has attracted more than 113,000 signatures. Its author, filmmaker Bandar Al-Baloui, remains stunned by the industry's timidity.
The fact that Hollywood has remained silent, I'm just flabbergasted by this. She had everything going for her.
One board member of the Producers Guild, who requested anonymity, noted that his organization is rarely activist, even though it does have clout. He said the Guild helped create and implement COVID protocols and an industry-wide sustainability program, which he said makes its silence on gun safety all the more frustrating. Covering Hollywood, I'm John Warner.
We told you last evening that the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, our giant water supplier, now says we're in a drought emergency. MWD Water Resource Manager Brad Coffey says they've asked local water agencies to talk to you and me about saving every drop.
Residents will be asked to make adjustments to how they're using water, or their agency may also adjust other mechanisms such as pricing to encourage using less water.
That means higher water bills if you use too much. Thanks for listening to the LA Report. I'm Nick Roman. Join us next time for another LA Report.
This podcast is supported by Dignity Health Southern California Hospitals, including Glendale Memorial, St. Mary in Long Beach, Northridge Hospital, California Hospital in downtown LA, St. Bernardine, and Community Hospital of San Bernardino. Across Dignity Health hospitals and care sites, the well-being of patients is always the priority. To learn about emergency services, heart care, and healthy babies, you can visit dignityhealth.org/SoCal. Dignity Health, hello human kindness.
A federal judge has overruled the Texas governor's ban on mask mandates in Texas schools, saying it violates the rights of children with disabilities. Republican Governor Greg Abbott rolled out his executive order months ago banning masking rules. He says such measures to protect against COVID-19 should be left up to personal responsibility, but the judge disagreed. Texas Tribune political correspondent Patrick Svitek is here. And Patrick, this case was brought by an advocacy group, the Disability Rights in Texas. What else did the judge say about his decision?
Well, as you pointed out, the judge said that this executive order violates the Americans with Disability Act. The judge specifically said the spread of COVID-19 poses a, quote, even greater risk for children with special health needs. And so this is, a pretty breakthrough moment for opponents of this executive order, which, as you pointed out, went into effect months ago. We'll have to see now whether the state takes this to the federal appeals level, where they've always had much more success than at the district court level here in Texas.
Right, and that would be the Attorney General. And we know that the state Attorney General has already sued at least 15 school districts that defied the governor's order, and they continue to require masks. So tell us first, how else were people responding there in Texas to that initial ban from the governor?
Well, there was a decent amount of defiance in response to that executive order. As you pointed out, some school districts went ahead and just instituted mask mandates regardless, including school districts in some of the big metropolitan areas of Texas. And they got threatening letters from the Attorney General. Some of them were dragged into court over this, and it really became a messy situation. And so there has been, at least among some school districts, but also some school districts that represent a lot of kids in Texas, some real rebellion to this executive order.
Well, then we got a statement today from one of the parents of the child plaintiffs in this lawsuit. That's Karina Pichardo in Fort Bend County, Texas. She said she's overjoyed about this judge's decision because now her school district can accommodate in-person learning for students like her daughter Miranda, who has Down syndrome, would be at high risk if she got COVID-19. After the state banned any mask requirements, her school stopped enforcing masks. She had to keep Miranda home from school for her own safety. So we're sure there are a lot of parents in this boat, but maybe parents also just tired of masks or questioning now, why do we need them since vaccines are available to children? What are parents saying there? I mean, you can give us just a sample.
Sure, the public in Texas polling has shown has been generally supportive of mask mandates, especially in schools. The public polling that the Texas Tribune and the University of Texas has done every few months here at the state level has found that majorities of voters support varying kinds of mask mandates, including for public school students and teachers and staff. And so the public, has been supportive of having masks required in schools, or at least giving the school districts the option of requiring masks in schools. So I think that's where the public sentiment is at on this. But as you point out, is that you could